are Jill Cory and David Cory, and we're going to be talking about the emotional intelligence, or we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence and the insight dimension of transformational leadership. You want to say hi, Jill?
Good morning.
Okay, so let's launch right in and we'll look at this concept of insight. And for those of you who have joined us, feel free to type into the chat box or the Q&A box at any time. We'll be trying to keep track of these two places for questions and for receiving information from you. So feel free to use that chat box at any time, and we'll take your questions at any time as we go through. I'm assuming that most of you have some knowledge of the EQI, the Emotional Quotient Inventory, which is the assessment tool that we are relating this information with, and the concept of emotional intelligence, but we'll do a bit of a review as we go through. But let's start by talking about what we mean by insight. And so in the leadership report from the EQI, there is this definition here, which is about a leader providing insight by sharing a purpose and hopeful vision. People are inspired, employees rather, are inspired to succeed, take risks, and connect to the purpose of the organization. And what's interesting is that there's really very little in terms of further definition or outlines or guidelines, right, Jill? We just
Yeah, I think that just to put some context around it, insight is one of the 4 leadership dimensions that have been identified in the transformational model of leadership in the EQI model. So we've reviewed in past webinars authenticity and coaching. So this is the 3rd of the 4 dimensions of leadership that we're reviewing today. And just to have some context around this topic.
Saw this quotation and I liked it. It seems to encapsulate, in some respects, this concept of insight. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. And really, this is that aspect of leadership which is related to inspiration, right, Jill?
Yeah, inspiration, but not in. I think we're trying to put some more context or some more meat on the notion of inspiration. So it's not just the words, but it's attached to a lot of actions as well. And so it's not just like, yay team, let's go. It's not a cheerleading concept. It's really, we're going to try to flesh out some of the ways in which it can show up by using the experience and strength that a leader has.
Yeah, it's not just rah, rah, let's go team.
Yeah.
It's more than that. And I think that the EQI does a nice job of putting some actual, meat on the bones, so to speak. Sorry for you vegetarians. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what we mean by insight.
And just, we've been asking ourselves, particularly as we do more and more leadership programs, what are some of the key qualities of insight? So we're breaking down emotional intelligence and attaching some of the EQ qualities to insight to really build the concept up. And so related to that is, how is insight related to leadership? And then lastly, what are the most important EI competencies when it comes to insight? And we've selected some from the 6 top EI competencies we've selected, some. We'll talk about that.
So what do we mean by insight? Well, insightful leaders, we thought we'd think about what are some of the things that they do. And insightful leaders are able to find the best in themselves and in turn inspire, engage, and mobilize others, even in the most demanding circumstances.
Which means that rather than collapsing under pressure or pulling in or getting more controlling or more hierarchical in difficult times, people actually, good leaders, lean on their experience and some of the EI competencies we'll talk about, such as optimism, to help move forward rather than some of the ways that we see people under pressure, which is counter to productivity and engagement and inspiration.
Okay, so whoops, we didn't finish talking about some of these capabilities.
Right. So the heart of insightful leadership, and again, we're kind of reaching into literature to see what's being said. And so first of all, we know that if you're going to be inspiring and bring what you've learned into an inspirational action, you need to find meaning in work, and you need to help others find meaning in work. You need to have alignment between your values and what you do. We, sometimes think about that as walking the talk, but where there's a very strong alignment with values and actions. As I referred to earlier, converting your emotions such as fear, stress into opportunity, not in a kind of cheerleading way, but into the resilience package, so that people draw on previous experiences of difficult times and use that to be able to bounce back and convert into a positive opportunity. Leveraging connections and community. So we're going to talk about the concept of social responsibility, that this work isn't done in isolation. You don't get to the top and then become a charismatic leader that pulls everybody forward. It's done in community. Nobody gets there alone. Acting in the face of risk also points to some of the innovation dimension that we'll be talking about later, but it also points to being so passionate about the work that you're doing and the values that you have, that you're willing to take the risk for the return for you and for everybody. And then this last one, sustaining the energy, because again, if any of you have worked with leaders who kind of are in a bit of a roller coaster where they're up, the organization is up, and when they're down, so goes the organization. This is about sustaining energy so that you bring some stability along with that excitement and passion.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jill. So many of you are familiar with this model, and this model was created originally in the 1980s by Reuven Bar-On, and then published by MHS, Multi-Health Systems, out of Toronto in 1997, first of all, and updated in 2011. And this is the current model that most of our work is based around. So we invite managers to go online, take the EQI, 133 statements. They respond to those statements with a Likert scale, and we get a report in which gives scores in these areas compared to a representative sample of the population. And at the center of the model, we've got this concept of emotional intelligence, and then outward from there, we have these wonderful competencies, all of which can be improved. And the EQI draws our attention and creates awareness around where people are operating with respect to these skills and competencies. And then we can talk about which ones need to be improved, why and how, and all those good things in our coaching relationships that we have. So every time we do a group, everybody gets a coach, and we really zero in on starting with assessment. And what MHS has done a lot of research and development. They've invested heavily, and they have found that there is a nice correlation between several of our EQ competencies, according to this model, and the various dimensions of the transformational leadership model. So today, once again, we are trying to relate and talk more about the insight dimension, and there are top 6 correlations between the EQI and a measure that measures competency in insight, and we're going to look at that and understand more about that. So here's the model of transformational leadership, which includes what we think are some wonderful areas to do some training around and some coaching, and we've developed some courses which really go deeply into these various areas. And as Jill mentioned, we've done authenticity and coaching as webinars, and now we're going to do insight, and of course innovation is to come. What do you want to say about this model, Jill?
Well, first of all, as we pointed out in the previous webinars, self-actualization is the one competency that shows up in all four dimensions of the leadership model. And self-actualization, to remind people, it's not about accomplishments so much as it is, again, about alignment, about doing it between values and your own values and your organizational values, but it's also about purpose and meaning. And so, as you like, obviously, the implication is that as a leader, you have to be grounded in what matters to you and what is meaningful for you. Particularly, we think in the insight dimension, where you are leading people with passion and commitment to through a process. And if you don't actually live and breathe that yourself, you're not going to feel, you're not going to be known as an authentic, inspiring leader.
Okay, just out of curiosity, if you wouldn't mind typing into the chat box, how many of you have a leadership role? How many of you who are on the line? And maybe just, just type in, where you are and maybe how many reports you have or something like that. Just to make this webinar a little bit more interactive, we'll take a look and then hopefully we can relate some of our presentation to you directly. So use the chat box. I'm going to check the Q&A box as well, just in case anybody's using that. All right, so okay, so we've got some people who are typing in there. Now, what I don't know is whether you can see the responses that people are typing in. So maybe just type that into. I know you could do it on meetings, and we use Zoom for meetings all the time, but with webinars, I'm not sure if you can actually see the chat box and what people are typing or not. Okay,
Great. So just as people are typing in, let's finish this thought about what's inside the insight dimension. So today, obviously, we've pointed to self-actualization, optimism. If you think of a best leader that you've had, you probably, what comes to mind is enthusiasm, energy, always being able to see the positive in something, being able to bounce back when you've hit an adverse moment or challenge, and a strong sense of who they are. So self-regard is not ego or arrogance. Self-regard is just a strong, stable sense of who they are and what their capacities are. Social responsibility, we'll talk again about that, because it's about thinking about the whole organization and the community beyond the organization, which again is this kind of the not the opposite end of the spectrum, but in a way, there's self-regard, so a strong, stable sense, but also a sense of who you are in relation to the community around you and the responsibilities you have to the community around you. Interpersonal relationships, that seems to go without saying, so we'll talk a little less about that today. And emotional expression. With insight, emotional expression is everything, because you have to lead through your passion, through your energy, through your heart to people.
Okay, just going to read some of what was typed in. So thank you so much. I see some names that are familiar to me. I've met some of these people before. So someone says, yes, they have 2 direct reports. They are a senior leader. One person has a leadership role in community development from the federal government, senior leadership, leadership position, nursing administration. Thank you for saying that you can't see what people are typing in. So someone else says I can see yours too. Okay, so some of you can see some things and some of you can't. Maybe open up that chat box so you can, if you can find the control, and maybe that's the problem. There is that. Whoops! What did I do now? Okay, we're just going to go back here, and all right. So we're going to carry on now and take a look at some of those competencies. So here are the top 6 correlations with empirical correlations with insight, and you can see that we have, as Jill mentioned, we've kind of covered self-regard and interpersonal relationships in previous webinars. And if you want to know more about those, let us know. We can point you in the right direction. But we're going to zero in on and focus on the 4 in blue there. So those top 6, well, the top 4 rather, correlations with insight, and we're just going to explore and talk about that a bit. And again, if you have any questions at any time, type them into the chat box.
So the idea is that when people get their assessment, if they get a leadership DQI assessment, if they get the leadership report, they will get this on one of their pages. And what it shows is their individual scores in relation to each of the 6, well, each of the competencies, but within insight, within each of the 6 competencies. So what we're asking people to do is 2 things. There's a leadership bar, which indicates where we want leaders to fall in terms of their scores. And that doesn't show up here, it shows up in another part of the report. But we also want people to see what's in and out of balance within each of the 4 dimensions, as well as what's in and out of balance across the 4 dimensions. So here you can see that a lower self-actualization score and a lower interpersonal relationship score paired with a very high self-regard score and a pretty reasonable social responsibility score. So this is an indicator to help people, I guess, begin to think about where the work needs to happen to bring all their scores up, to put them in greater balance. Because what happens, Dave, when, for example, with high self-regard and a lower score in interpersonal relationships and self-actualization, what would you kind of be concerned about?
I think there's a bit of a danger there that we want to make sure that people understand, and that is, you know, they're saying that they feel pretty competent and pretty confident about themselves, but it's not going well personally and interpersonally with others. So we want to know whether they're being overconfident or coming across to others possibly as arrogant or self-important or have an overestimation of their skills and abilities. And coupled with that, and again, well, not again, but you know, 102 and 100, that's the mean. So they're right around the mean. So they're not low scores. It's just that differential that you pointed out, Jill, between the 123 in self-regard and the lower scores. And so we want to ask whether this person is in the right job with a self-actualization score that has that differential, whether it's a job that has meaning and purpose for that individual, and whether it's the right one that fits their values and it's where they're going, because we know that leads to a less effective leader overall, and certainly less effective in this area of insight given these differentials.
Right, and so you can imagine this picture of somebody who themselves feels fairly strong but doesn't have strong relationships or passion. That's a hard leader to get behind. When I look at it through the kind of leadership lens.
Right, and that's not a low score in emotional expression. So right. What are they saying to others?
Yeah.
So are they saying to others, "I really hate this job," which is of course not a good thing. So, so we would really want to coach this individual around looking at the role and.
Yeah, and Dave did say that 100 is around the median,
is the mean,
but. It's not for the leadership bar, right? So it's a separate, there's a separate measure that we, that's being validated, that shows where leaders should be falling.
Yeah, which is a bit of a stretch goal for leaders. Sure. It's like so we're comparing them with the general population with the numbers, and then we're comparing them with the leadership bar with other leaders. Okay, so let's once again, this is just a screenshot of just that one area, insight, and now we want to take a look at those top 4 that we suggested that we were going to take a look at. And so here, once again, just some more thoughts on insight, and what are the characteristics of insight? What would you expect to see in someone who demonstrates insight? And so the first one is this idea of humility. So why humility? Well, we thought that, someone who demonstrates insight, that is, they are able to share their wisdom and experience. That is not someone who is an information hoarder
Or a poser, right?
or
Like
yeah,
also
yeah,
posers.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It says this is the way you have to do it. This is someone who understands where they've come from, knows their journey, their path, and is willing to share out of a sense of humility and not because I'm the expert and I know better than you.
Mhm. So that concept really collapses in with wisdom, that people know what they know, and they know where their strengths are, but they also know who to turn to, um, to to I guess broaden, or to make sure that all the knowledge in the room is being utilized properly. So humility and wisdom are often quite connected in my mind and experience.
This idea of sharing the vision, this is about someone who has a bit of a privileged position, in that they privileged perspective, rather. They maybe have been there a long time, or they've risen through the ranks, or they've gained knowledge and experience from another organization, and so they can see more clearly or further or something. They know where the organization is going, and when they're able to share that vision with others, it becomes motivational and inspiring for others. And so that's that idea of sharing the collective organizational purpose.
Mhm. And again, so these two ideas of communicating and sharing are, they're not collapsed, but they're really associated. Um, and the sharing your story, I think, is really about knowing deeply, again, back up to humility, who has shaped you as a leader, what experiences have shaped you as a leader. And you give credit to all the people and experiences along the way that have helped you in your development journey. And insight is about not just sharing that, but being committed to doing that with your people as well. So that once you rise to the top, you don't put up the walls and protect your territory. It's your turn now to be one of those people who shapes another person.
Yeah, yeah, and again, the name of the concept does not really do it justice. I mean, it's not about having insights. It's not just that you see something that other people don't see. It's about really sharing what you see. It is communicating outward. It is so many of these things, and if you're asking yourself, how do you get all that from one word or one short little definition? It's really about what the EQI is measuring, and how they are correlated and connected to each other, and what we know about leadership from the literature. This is about collaborative and participative leadership, which is really the leadership of the 21st century. Okay, moving right along. Let's look at what insight is not.
We may have more or less covered this, but really it's about knowing the values of the organization, knowing how your values are aligned, but not imposing your values on others. In fact, your job really is to make sure that people are in projects and assignments that value their values. Of course, there's some overriding organizational values, but also it's not about imposing your value on others or believing that you've made it on your own. Many of these things we've referred to. It's not about corporate ladder climbing or personal achievement, and it's not about ego or self-centeredness. It's really about a strong commitment to giving others what you got on your way through your leadership journey.
Yeah, it's not I have this insight and I'm going to use it for personal gain. It's I have this insight and I'm going to share it and make sure that everybody benefits from the insight that I have. That's more what
I just noticed the slide that you chose here. That's
you
a good one.
You
Yeah.
didn't notice that
No.
before.
I'm concerned about what's on the page. Lack of insight. What can I say?
Okay, so social responsibility. This really speaks to one of the the essential, critical, underlying qualities with respect to insight. And I just, I just love, there's a lot of words on this page, but we didn't want to get rid of any of them because they're just powerful.
Well, I think it's tempting to think of social responsibility in terms of recycling and doing charity work and
serving food at the soup kitchen.
Yeah. And so we're pushing ourselves very
None
hard.
of which are bad, by the way.
No, all of which constitutes an excellent leadership approach to your life. But in the context of being a leader in an organization, one of the things, and we've said this, is inspiring others to think more than about their own jobs and advancements. And I think many of you might relate to being in work environments where people are really so competitive that the spirit of collaboration and team has been difficult. And conversely, if you've been in an organization where a team is valued and collaboration is recognized and achievements are seen as part of an overall accomplishment, it's a very inspiring workplace. So this is about creating a culture. I think the whole notion of social responsibility is about culture creating.
Mm-hmm. I love this. This was your line, Jill. The greatest good for the greatest number.
Right.
And really, that encapsulates social responsibility, and also is so connected and tied to insight. Mm-hmm. It's like making sure that insight is beneficial for others.
Mm-hmm. So this notion came. I was driving yesterday and I was cut. Well, a guy pulled up beside me and he was so annoyed that we had to stop for a pedestrian. And then he shot out, and then he had to, it looked like he was going to try to get through another crosswalk with the light going on. And at the last minute, he slammed on his brake. I'm like, there's more than just dangerous driving. It's who is he thinking about when he's driving fast? Or who am I thinking about when I'm paying attention to the speed limit in the context? I'm paying attention to that kid has a family, and I have as much responsibility as anybody else to make sure that kid gets across the street safely. And that guy was thinking about himself and about where he wanted to go and how fast he wanted to go. And so this notion of social responsibility is the antidote to entitlement, which we've been getting more and more requests from as a company.
Yeah, so I've just done my second one-day program on dealing with entitled employees, and so it is a bit of a hot button topic, mm-hmm. And very contemporary.
Mm-hmm. And I think we are losing. Well, okay, I'm not going to go on with that, but
we could go on. Yeah, we could go on about that, but we won't.
Yeah.
So social responsibility empowers employees. Yeah, this is about making sure that employees have development opportunities and that they're included in things, and it's really it's really about giving to employees so that they feel empowered, and creating the optimum conditions to bring out the best in employees is also one of the things that social responsibility allows us to do.
Mm-hmm. And so best leaders think about their whole environment. We recently had the opportunity to meet with the president of UBC, and he's a very impressive, lovely person. And one of the things that was very striking about us is that he wasn't just concerned about the UBC campus. He was concerned about the high school students in the whole community, and the role that UBC has to play globally across Canada. Like, he really understood,
and locally with the city of Vancouver, or so many things.
Yeah, so
very,
he
very
really
impressive.
understood his role in social responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then there's this one which is about finding ways to ensure employees' talents are being leveraged and aligned with their values. So not just that they're aligned with the organization's values, but they're aligned with their values so that they can grow and develop according to their values as well.
And I'm laughing because it's controversial right now, the Alberta conscience, it's the when people can choose not to do part of their work.
Conscientious objector.
Yeah. Well, no, but there's, the bill is the conscience.
Oh, the conscience bill. Yeah, we won't get into that right now.
So we're not talking about that. Is my point. We're talking about values in alignment and making sure people have a fit in their own job, so they experience their own sense of commitment and passion for the work. And finally, social responsibility is a way to address inequities and start to shine a light on what were unconscious biases and now hopefully are more conscious biases, so that we can make it a more equitable and accessible workplace.
Optimism is another one that kind of encapsulates insight as well, and really first and foremost, and I said it off the top, is this notion of inspiring others. And so, how do we inspire others? We inspire others with our enthusiasm, with demonstrating our passion, and this idea of creating an abundance versus a competitive or a scarcity work environment where everybody has to fight for their own piece, versus a synergistic, or the notion that we create more when we're actually operating from an abundance perspective.
This slide makes me smile because in all my previous work, I work in the area of violence against women, and as a researcher and trainer, and I would do slides with, I couldn't let go of some of the information, and David's always laughing at me for having too many words on a page, and honestly, this is his page. So we'll just skip through, we'll just highlight some of the key things, but obviously we think this
I liked all this stuff.
I know, that's the problem. I always just have a philosophy of talk faster and use smaller font, because you don't really want to get rid of anything. I think optimism really fundamentally is about shaping the narrative of the organization. Is it a culture of cynicism? Is it a culture of scarcity? Is it a culture of optimism? Is it a culture of passion, commitment, knowing that you're all going in a direction that matters not just to you individually, not just to the organization, not just to external stakeholders and customers, but actually having a positive impact. So doing things that matter. And I think the leader plays such a central role in shaping that narrative.
Absolutely, and also I just want to add to that this notion of a focus on risk management, and I noticed that some of you are from healthcare, and we've just been doing a lot of coaching with physicians and other senior leaders in healthcare, and this notion of well, this one individual used the word dread.
Yeah.
Going to work, dread. Like, what's going to happen today? Who's going to die?
Yeah. What mistake am I going to get?
Yeah. And when am I going to get sued?
Yeah.
So all of these things, and wow, it's and some of you in healthcare probably know what we're talking about, but the choice to focus on all of the ways in which people are helped, all of the success stories, all of the wonderful interactions, all of the teaching moments, all of the inspiring moments, that's optimism. We have a choice on what we focus on. And so the suggestion here is focusing on what's possible, focusing on this idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So optimism is about what you put your attention on, what you focus on. We're not saying don't manage risk.
Right.
But we're saying, it is those positive success stories that are motivating and inspiring.
And finally, this very long sentence, but you view challenges as a naturally occurring event.
This was your sentence.
Yeah, well, but how many people think of adversity as something that's really a pesky derailer rather than just a naturally occurring event, whether it's change or challenge or an obstacle. And that, again, the narrative is about embracing all that comes your way and seeing that as all part of the organizational process. So people don't get in trouble for hitting a barrier or a challenge or not getting it right the first time, but there's this kind of, we'll handle that.
Yeah, and that was that line, shape the narrative, which we skipped.
No, I talked about it.
You did?
You skipped it.
Okay. Excellent. So shaping the narrative, we leaders get to shape the narrative. And so again, what are you spending all your time talking about?
Mhm.
Okay, moving right along. Let's talk about self-actualization. Again, we have talked about self-actualization to some extent, um, and have mentioned that it is the number one correlation with all four. And so being in the right role is critical, and being passionate about your role is critical for insight. If you're not passionate about your role, what are you role modeling? What are you demonstrating to others, and how are you impacting on them?
Mhm. I think that last statement, the willingness to grow and develop, from an insight and inspiration perspective, when people see leaders willing to acknowledge their mistakes, willing to learn, willing to be vulnerable, I think that says so much in terms of inspiring others to do the same. And I'm not sure that you can teach willingness. I think you have to role model willingness,
Mm-hmm.
but it's fundamental to change and growth.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
They say that the biggest barrier to learning is thinking you already know it.
right. Yeah, yeah.
So absolutely, willingness to grow and develop, and recognizing what matters to people you lead, finding ways for them to do work and projects that matter, that have meaning and a sense of purpose for them, which requires that you know and understand what has meaning and purpose for them, which is interpersonal relationships, which we're not covering, but is one of the top 6 correlates there. Um, and then, of course, demonstrating this living in accordance with your own values, and inspiring others to reach their goal and potential. Okay, so emotional expression is the last one that we want to talk about, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And this one is critical and important to insight because of the sharing aspect.
Mm-hmm. Communication and
Yes,
sharing,
yes.
and it's not just the words that you use; it's how you walk down the hallway,
Yeah.
and who you stop and talk to, and the tone of voice and your facial. I mean, I know everybody on the line knows all of this, but it is about how you express the the role, the vision, the optimism, the sense of social responsibility, and as we say, it drives culture. It drives culture not just from the flavor of the culture, but how open people are in the organization, how emotionally intelligent people are,
Mm-hmm.
how appropriate it is to be vulnerable and to be relatively honest, because all of that helps and is inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
People's stories are always inspirational.
Absolutely. Yes.
And it's the best chance of engaging others and developing team, finding lots of channels to express passion. And you can see it in every level of every organization. An encounter with, a front office admin person all the way up the chain tells you how the organization is functioning in terms of its connection to the values and mission of the organization.
Mm-hmm. We didn't necessarily talk about it in preparing for this webinar, but whenever we talk about emotional expression with leaders, and they ask us, why do I have to express my emotions? We say, because that is how people get to know you. And we don't trust what we don't know. And so unless leaders are developing their ability to express their emotions, they cannot be known. And they're playing their cards too close to their chest. They're not allowing others in, and they're not allowing for trust to develop. And I was thinking just now about trust and insight, and that's interesting because if you don't trust your leader, then when a leader shares their insight with you, you're not going to trust that you can count on it and that it's something to be listened to.
It's interesting, Dave. You talk about emotional expression in leaders as if it's always been the thing, but we recognize that this is a growing area, and there are still lots of leaders who have a lot of concerns about being too emotionally expressive. So we don't take for granted this is a really important area of development, and a contributor to the overall performance of not just a leader but an organization.
Absolutely. Okay, so
Just
oh,
let's do a little poll. How many of you end your team meetings looking like that?
and I wanted to ask, how many have noticed leaders who lack passion?
Mm,
Because we got that line from an article, or it was a quotation from someone who wrote extensively about leadership, but this idea that lack of passion leads to tragic disengagement, or was it a president, one of the dead presidents
I
maybe?
can't remember.
In any case, this notion that lack of passion leads to tragic disengagement
Mm-hmm.
is really quite something. I wonder if managers realize this idea that if they're not passionate about their role, passionate about what they do, passionate about the organization, that there's a direct connection with employee engagement scores.
Well, yeah, and which I think, again, in the organization that I work for, and all the ones that we have had contact with, um, yeah. So somebody here is writing a comment. In healthcare, most leaders are burned out and cynical and potentiate a culture of negativity. We've certainly encountered that.
Jill, in your 20 years in healthcare,
Yeah.
what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that it comes and goes depending on the leadership. Um, and and I think one of the, ironically or paradoxically, one of the ways to kill engagement is to do an engagement survey and then not do the right thing with the
Well,
survey.
not do anything with
Yeah.
the survey.
Well,
in many cases, they don't do anything with
yeah,
the survey.
or they do very token things with the survey.
Yeah.
And these are not the ways to develop engagement. We're really pointing here to leadership as the best chance of engaging others is through leaders that know why they're there, know what they're doing, know how they got there, know who helped them, and being prepared to do the same for others.
And to be more direct, we're talking about the emotional intelligence skills of managers. And some people think it's about, again, it's about those acknowledgement cards, or
Yeah.
different sort of organizational initiatives. But we have to help managers with their skills.
Yeah, and it's shed quite a bit of light with the physicians we've been working with lately about the amount of worry that they have, and we've been wondering, and I think it's true in many other work cultures, who's not telling them that they're doing a good job?
Mhm.
Who's not telling them that it's that all the things that Dave went over, all their successes, all their contributions, if they're not getting both sides, if they are only living in fear and worry, you get what, Amanda, you're talking about, which is this cynical and negative work culture where people in survival mode really truly are just able to look after themselves and they can't think about the team. And yet, working in a team is the best way to mitigate against burnout, to collaborate, to feel like you're pulling in the same direction. And it is not an environment these days that's being cultivated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you're not alone, but it's discouraging for sure.
Okay.
Thanks for that question, that comment.
Yeah. So other comments or questions from anyone? We're going to open it up now to questions. So here's a great question. How you can increase the passion for their jobs? Yeah, really good question. Only by the example, talking with them, or is there any methodology or activity to do it? This is an excellent question, and I guess it unfortunately I want to use the phrase "it depends," but so how do you increase passion for jobs, Jill?
Well, I mean, immediately what comes to mind is to get it right at the top. That so often the employees are held responsible for the kind of negative or cynical workplace environment and culture. But if you're not getting it right at the top, if people there are not driven to attach their work to the values and mission of the organization, and that if they're not driven to communicate that all the way down and up with stability, with certainty, with consistency, so that everybody everybody from the cafeteria servers all the way up to the C-suite know why they're there and who they're serving and what the positive impact of what they're doing is. You can't go to a pocket of the organization and and build passion there. You might find it in pockets as people sort of in their own ways, pull a team away from the central organization and do their thing and find some meaning in it. But to actually build passion, you have got to know the impact you're having on your customer and the community.
Yes, and I just want to disagree with you a bit, Jill, and want to talk about. So you said you can't build passion in a pocket,
No, I said people do
uh,
when it's not
oh,
happening
okay, okay, because
organizationally.
that's what I was going to suggest is that idea of circle of influence. So despite the fact that senior leadership may not be demonstrating insight in terms of sharing their passion for the organization or for the work, you can always do that. Well, you can try to do that in your area, and we're talking a little bit like. We're talking a little bit about systems thinking and the fact that if the system's broken, it's very difficult to change one part of the system. And I think that was your point.
Yeah.
But I would say try. I would say try to build this culture of positivity, at least, demonstrate optimism and do it together. Do it as a team and not necessarily individually. So yeah, I mean that's a really great question. I get the.
I don't believe you can fake passion, as it will show. Correct, Fiona. You cannot fake passion. There's some things you can fake, but not passion. And so that again, I think you're pointing to our earlier point that the leaders at the top have got to believe in what they're doing and believe in the positive impact, understand the impact that they're having, and believe that impact. And that's how you transmit it to the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to stop any employee anywhere in the organization, and they should be able to tell you why they're doing what they're doing for the organization, and feel committed to that.
Yeah, and that would be evidence of effective leadership.
Yeah.
If you heard that and saw that, and I agree as well about the faking passion. It is about if you're in the wrong role, that will show up as a self-actualization, as a low self-actualization score,
Probably a low optimism score too, right?
I've coached a couple of people out of their organization, and that was one of the things was that there was a lower alignment between their values and what the organization was about. And so, yeah, trying to get the right people in the right positions is a difficult challenge at the best of times in organizations.
Which I guess in some ways is implied in what we're doing, but this is such a useful tool for so many reasons. And one of them has the potential of helping people either in current jobs to see where they need to develop, but also to influence thinking around hiring people into their right jobs. I think it's helpful. Even if you don't use the tool, just the concept of like, are we hiring somebody who's going to inspire and lead the organization? Or are we hiring somebody who has a track record of a bottom line somewhere else?
Yeah.
And so obviously both matter, but
yeah.
Are you including that in your hiring?
Right. Yeah. And I think some of the questions come from the idea of that there is a kind of textbook organizational effectiveness and there is real life. And so, and the answer to real life in many circumstances is leadership development. So our leaders offer the opportunity to develop their skills so they can address these issues and improve the effectiveness of the organization. And so if you have other questions, please send them along. A frequent question we get is, how can you encourage leadership to pay attention to some of these ideas and some of these issues? And we always answer that question by saying that it is about, what are the pain points what are the what is some of the issues that are affecting organizational effectiveness, and I think Alejandra, you pointed out some of those things, that there's a decreased passion for the job, and maybe a decreased employee engagement scores, and again, it's about making sure those supervisors are able to support those employees more, able to provide more information for those employees, to create a more effective team environment for those employees so they feel supported. And
yeah, it's interesting because I definitely come from more systems thinking. So I think sometimes what happens is that we make the employee wrong rather than the organizational leadership responsible for what's kind of being derailed or gone off the rails. So it's also what meaning you give to those surveys, right? Is it just like, oh, well, those disgruntled employees just need to find other work, or do we look at the system that's broken and I think hold leaders very accountable for the culture that's being created?
And none of these leadership dimensions operate in a vacuum. They operate in concert with each other. And so, I was just thinking about being the proactive person that I am, thinking about our next webinar on innovation, and thinking that really some innovation is required here. How are we going to creatively come up with solutions that don't have to cost a lot of money, because nobody has money for those things, and really are about supporting and helping each other to create a better work environment for everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, David, because really, like, we are not talking about a financial investment here so much as a narrative and walking that talk. I know lots of organizations spend a lot of money trying to get their mission and values statements right, and then they don't do anything with them in terms of actually walking it out consistently and congruently throughout the organization. So there are people at lower levels that feel very discouraged and disappointed in their leadership when that happens. But we're really talking here about this is not a big cost investment so much as it is a values investment.
Absolutely. So I'm just gonna make sure that there are no more questions here. If you have a question, type it in the chat box. Okay, that seems to be all the questions that you have for us. And so we want to say thank you for participating in this webinar or watching the recording wherever you happen to be. Visit our website, check us out if we can be of any service at any time.
Yeah, feel free to follow up with others if you have more questions. Thanks very much for joining today.
We'll send you the link to the recording so you can share it with others. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.